Everyone has a regular morning routine. Maybe this morning you got up and took a shower using soap that contained ingredients like coconut oil. The coconut oil had to be harvested from coconuts growing in faraway places such as Indonesia, the Philippines, or India, which all lie on the other side of the globe. You might have also eaten cereal that contains wheat, which has a high likelihood of originating from Europe, China, India, or the Midwest. It probably also contains sugar from Brazil, India, China, or Thailand. If you're older, you might have also had a coffee that had to be shipped from Brazil or Vietnam. You also probably drove here with oil from Russia, Saudi Arabia, or Texas. Many people don't give a passing thought to where their many luxuries come from, or how they got to where they are. We certainly live in a strange world where an average t-shirt travels farther than the average human, and this weirdness is facilitated by none other than trade. My name is Quin, and my chapel will be about trade and how it has affected our history and still affects us today. Trade is all around us, whether we see it or not, and it governs many aspects of our lives. Trade is so important to our history that long-distance trade is often cited as the beginning of complex societies. Cities, cultures, and civilizations have risen, flourished, and collapsed in conjunction to the usage of trade routes near them. A good example of this is the ancient Greek city of Antioch. The city was founded in the year 300 BC by one of Alexander the Great's generals in what is now southern Turkey. The city had a strategic position at the very end of the Silk Road, which made the city incredibly wealthy by taxing the Silk Road trade flowing in and out of the city. This also made the city very powerful, as the controller of the city can control the distribution of Silk Road trade throughout the rest of the Greek world. Sure enough, the city's prosperity attracted many migrants from mainland Greece, which eventually gave Antioch a population of 500,000 people, which was larger than Athens at the time. The city also became the capital of the Seleucid Empire in 240 BC. It was one of two major centers of ancient Greek culture. It became the third largest city in the Roman Empire and became one of the most important centers of early Christianity. Now I know what you're thinking. If Antioch is so important, then why is it so rarely mentioned today? And why is it not on any maps? Well, the city's luck had to end eventually. Antioch fell prey to destructive earthquakes and constant warfare. But more fundamentally, the trade routes shifted to not include Antioch as a result of the Mongols conquering just about the rest of Asia. The Mongols were able to completely revise the trade routes to make them easier to travel and more beneficial for traders. But more trade is not always a good thing, as we're about to see in a minute. Anyway, all the decreased trade going through Antioch basically killed the city's main money source, and from then on, the city gradually disappeared from everyone's vacation lists until it reached its current state of ruined marble and dust. This is a classic example among many of the power trade can wield over societies. Many of the city-states that were wholly dependent on trade, like Antioch, have now since disappeared, but a few still remain, Singapore being a prime example. To show just how much trade can contribute to the wealth of a city, look at Venice, which was its own mercantile republic for most of its history. Trade made the city so fabulously wealthy that the entire city is made out of marble. About a year and a half ago, my family and I traveled to Italy for vacation, and on this trip we traveled to the city of Venice. The city was originally hundreds of islands that people settled to escape from the danger of the invading Ostrogoths from mainland Italy. The city then developed lots of infrastructure and architecture until it assumed its present form of a city with canals instead of roads. Traveling through the city, it almost feels as if Venice was built specifically for sea trade, with boats lining the canals. The Venetians were so masterful at sea trade, in fact, that they were renowned all throughout Europe for their masterful shipbuilding. In my travels throughout Venice, it was plain to see how powerful and wealthy the Republic of Venice once was, with the inside of St. Mark's Basilica literally covered in tiles of gold leaf. This trade made Venice not only wealthy, but also incredibly powerful, eventually having a navy that rivaled that of the mighty Ottoman Empire. The Venetian arsenal, which was a complex of shipyards and armories located in Venice, was once productive enough to build an entire ship in just one day. This is an extreme example of the positive correlation between trade, wealth, and power, and this is a correlation you can see many times over when examining history. By now you've heard me blabber on and on about these magical trade routes, but here's how they actually work, specifically focusing on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was mainly a web of trade routes that connected the Eastern Mediterranean to Central Asia and Central Asia to China. The goods being traded on the routes saw much more of the world than any of the people who traded for them actually did. These merchants went back and forth between towns, buying and selling goods to other traders who would continue moving and trading. So the Silk Road kind of acted like a giant conveyor belt with everyone marking up prices along the way. So what was it they actually traded? Well, you could probably tell this from the name, but silk was one of the main commodities traveling this giant conveyor belt of merchants. The making of silk had long been the main source of trading wealth for China, and before the invention of designer clothing, silk clothes were the #1 way to tell people that you were rich. Besides silk, many other goods like wine and olive oil came to the Mediterranean. Silver and jade and iron came from China, cotton from India, ivory from the East African coast, and incense and spices from Arabia. These all found their way onto the Silk Road. All this trading also had the consequence of creating a small but well-off merchant class, in which people didn't necessarily have to be born well to move up the social ladder. The Silk Road is also important because it not only spread goods, but was, for centuries, the world highway for ideas to spread. Religions spread, like Buddhism, which, with the help of the Silk Road, began to spread its wings across China, Japan, Korea, and Central Asia. Now here's where the Mongols enter back into the picture. To put the military expertise of the Mongols into perspective, the Mongols conquered more land in 25 years than the Romans were able to do in 400. They even created the first free trade zone within the borders of their empire, which, as you can clearly see behind me, is huge. By the time the Mongols came onto the scene, the Silk Road had been used for 1,000 years, but had since fallen into disuse. The Mongols really helped recreate these trade routes, since they valued trade because they could tax it. Remember, trade is also a process that requires human contact between previously isolated groups of people, and because of this, many deadly diseases have used trade routes as a sort of pathogen superhighway. These diseases spread along the Silk Road towns and way stations by being carried by the merchants who traveled through them. Remember how I said the Mongols were able to revolutionize the trade routes? Well, that had some dire consequences. The new ease of trade that Eurasians now enjoyed allowed one of the worst outbreaks of bubonic plague in history, the Black Death in 1348. The Black Death was so incredibly devastating that Europe lost about half its population, while the city of London lost 2/3 of its population. After that downer, let's focus on something more positive about trade, like the spreading of ideas and the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Indian Ocean trade was larger, wealthier, and more diverse than we give it credit for, and it was probably even more important than the Silk Road. It was also much better at moving ideas and new culture around the world than the Silk Road ever was. Presumably, this is because instead of acting like a giant conveyor belt like the Silk Road did, with merchants not actually traveling that far, contact was far more direct, because someone living on the Swahili coast could sail to India in less than a month without having to travel thousands of miles overland. This transference of culture is easily seen with the spread of Islam over the Indian Ocean. You may not think to associate Indonesia with Islam, but today it has the largest Islamic population in the world. How did this come to be? The Indian Ocean trade routes were largely controlled by Muslim merchants, who set up many trading communities in the areas they traded with. This helped expose new religion and culture to places thousands of miles away. People living in these areas converted to Islam because it helped to have religious and cultural ties, as well as economic ties, to the people you're trading with. Talking about huge and efficient systems such as these really seem to dwarf any individual country's history, and it's fascinating and exciting to realize how much these average merchants really have shaped our past, present, and future, arguably more than any king or emperor ever will. It's easy for us to forget to what extent trade has affected us and will continue to affect us for the rest of our lives and the rest of our descendants' lives. Just ponder over the fact that today we live in a world so interconnected by trade that a t-shirt travels farther than the average human. The very t-shirts you keep at home in your drawers are probably made of cotton that was grown in Texas, then shipped to China for manufacturing, then sent back to the US for you to buy and wear. And in the future, it could be donated to an agency like Goodwill that ships American-used clothing to East Africa. The extent of these systems in which every single one of us is a player is summarized nicely by John Green in the video above.
In a mere 15,000 years, humans went from hunting and gathering to creating such improbabilities as the airplane, the internet, and the 99-cent double cheeseburger. It's an extraordinary journey, one that I will now symbolize by embarking upon a journey of my own, over to camera 2. Hi there, camera 2, it's me, John Green. Let's start with that double cheeseburger. Oh, food photography. So this hot hunk of meat contains 490 calories. To get this cheeseburger, you have to feed, raise, and slaughter cows, then grind their meat, then freeze it, and ship it to its destination. You also gotta grow some wheat and then process the living crap out of it until it's whiter than Queen Elizabeth I. Then you gotta milk some cows and turn their milk into cheese. And that's not even to mention the growing and pickling of cucumbers, or the sweetening of tomatoes, or the grinding of mustard seeds, etc. How in the sweet name of everything holy did we ever come to live in a world in which such a thing can even be created? And how is it possible that those 490 calories can be served to me for an amount of money that if I make the minimum wage here in the US, I can earn in 11 minutes? And most importantly, should I be delighted or alarmed to live in this strange world of relative abundance? Well, to answer that question, we're not going to be able to look strictly...
Now, I'm not going to pretend I have the answers to those questions, but what I do know is that we are all currently making the history I've spent all chapel talking about. By purchasing, using, and disposing of foreign goods, we are all forever altering the course of our futures. Will a new plague roll around tomorrow like the Black Death, spread by the dramatic increase in world trade? Will the exchange of ideas and culture lead us to a new global renaissance? These things are difficult to predict, but they do seem astonishingly possible in today's world. It's important to remember that you, me, your teachers, and the parents sitting in the back, and even Mr. Conklin, all shape our conjoined futures by unknowingly moving borders and simultaneously helping and hurting the future of our species through the trade that we all participate in. Always remember the effect and power that everyday people like us have on the world through trade. Have a wonderful remainder of your day, and thank you for listening.